Buy your sister that penthouse or you're no longer my daughter, my mom spat. I took back our family business instead. 2 months later, they were evicted. I 31F grew up being constantly reminded that my existence was secondary to my sister's. Every birthday, every achievement, every milestone in my life was overshadowed by my younger sister Vanessa's needs and wants. For most of my life, I accepted this as normal. That's just how our family worked. I was the responsible one, the one who worked hard and asked for little, while Vanessa was the princess who deserved everything handed to her on a silver platter. I never thought I'd have to choose between my sanity and my family, but when my mother threatened to disown me for not buying my sister a penthouse, I finally understood that some relationships aren't worth saving. The family business my father built from nothing was at stake, and with it, the livelihoods of over 50 employees who had become like family to me. This is how I went from being the family doormat to taking control of my father's legacy and cutting off the two people who never truly valued me. My earliest memory of the disparity between Vanessa and me was my 8th birthday. I received a practical set of books my mother deemed educational, while just 2 months later, Vanessa's birthday was celebrated with a lavish party complete with pony rides and a professional magician. When I asked why my birthday had been so different, my mother simply said, "Vanessa is more sensitive. She needs these things to be happy. You're stronger." That became the refrain of my childhood. Vanessa needed the new clothes, the dance lessons, the expensive summer camps. I was expected to understand, to make do with less, to be grateful for the scraps of attention thrown my way. My father saw the inequality but rarely intervened directly. Instead, he would find small ways to acknowledge me, helping with my science projects, teaching me about the family construction business, or slipping me extra allowance for being such a good helper. My older brother Alex was the only one who truly understood what I was going through. 2 years my senior, he too existed in Vanessa's shadow. We formed an alliance early, finding solidarity in our shared experience of being overlooked. When Vanessa would throw a tantrum to get her way, Alex and I would exchange knowing glances. When she broke something and blamed it on one of us, we'd cover for each other. We became each other's support system in a household that seemed designed to prioritize only one child. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school while maintaining a 4 GPA. When college applications came around, I received several scholarship offers. My mother's reaction wasn't pride but dismissal. Well, at least that saves us money for Vanessa's education. I chose a state school with a strong business program, working 30 hours a week to cover expenses beyond my scholarship. Meanwhile, Vanessa attended an expensive private university where she changed majors 3 times, took 6 years to graduate, and had every expense covered by our parents. Despite the lack of support, I excelled. By 25, I had completed my MBA and was already making a name for myself in the regional construction industry. Dad had begun grooming me to eventually take over the family business, Westfield Construction. He recognized my work ethic, my understanding of the industry, and my ability to connect with the employees and clients alike. Alex had chosen a different path, pursuing his passion for writing, but he remained my closest confidant and supporter. Then our father was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The 6 months between diagnosis and my father's passing were brutal. I took a leave of absence from work to help manage his care, sitting with him through chemo sessions, organizing his medications, and trying to keep his spirits up. Alex flew in from Chicago as often as possible. Vanessa would occasionally make an appearance, usually just long enough to ask for money or complain about some crisis in her life before disappearing again. In his final weeks, my father became increasingly concerned about the future of Westfield Construction. One evening, when we were alone in his hospital room, he took my hand and spoke the words that would later become my armor. "Listen to me, Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The business isn't just about profit, it's about the families who depend on it. Jerry's kid is starting college next year. Maria just bought her first house. Don made it through rehab because we kept his job waiting. I need to know they'll be taken care of." I promised him I would protect his legacy and the people who had helped build it. 2 days later, he called his lawyer to the hospital and made changes to his will. I wasn't privy to the details, but I assumed he was ensuring the business would be managed responsibly. When he passed a week later, I was holding his hand. Vanessa was at a spa day. She claimed she desperately needed to deal with the stress. The funeral revealed much about our family dynamics. I stood stoically beside my mother, accepting condolences and making arrangements. Alex delivered a moving eulogy that captured our father's spirit perfectly. Vanessa created a scene by sobbing dramatically and needing to be escorted out, only to be found taking selfies in the funeral home bathroom 20 minutes later. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work, taking on more responsibility at Westfield while my grief slowly transformed into determination. My mother became even more protective of Vanessa, constantly making excuses for her behavior and funneling money to her for various emergencies. I maintained a cordial relationship with them but focused primarily on honoring my father's memory through his business. Then Alex was in a near-fatal car accident. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Alex had been hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. He was in critical condition with a punctured lung, internal bleeding, and severe head trauma. I drove 4 hours to reach the Chicago hospital, sick with fear the entire journey. For 3 weeks, I practically lived in that hospital. I covered Alex's medical expenses when we discovered his insurance had lapsed. He'd been between publishing contracts and couldn't afford the premiums. I worked remotely from his hospital room, stepping into the hallway for important calls and responding to emails while he slept. When he was finally stable enough to be discharged, I arranged for the best rehabilitation facility and paid for in-home care during his recovery. Through it all, our mother and Vanessa were conspicuously absent. Mom called occasionally to ask for updates but always had an excuse for why she couldn't visit. Vanessa was having anxiety attacks about Alex's condition. The drive was too long, they had other commitments they couldn't break. Their absence spoke volumes, and Alex noticed. "You know," he said one evening as I helped him with his physical therapy exercises, "I always knew you were the best of us, Em. But these past months have shown me you're the best of humanity too." His recovery took nearly a year, during which our bond grew even stronger. When he was finally well enough to return to his writing, the experience had given him material for what would eventually become his breakthrough novel. Meanwhile, I had effectively been running Westfield Construction single-handedly, proving to myself and everyone else that I was more than capable of fulfilling my promise to Dad. I thought I had reached an equilibrium with my mother and Vanessa, limited contact, surface-level pleasantries, mutual agreement to avoid deeper issues. I was wrong, the storm was just gathering strength. The lunch was Vanessa's idea. She texted me out of the blue saying she missed me and wanted to catch up. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at an overpriced restaurant downtown that she chose, of course. From the moment she arrived 30 minutes late, I could tell she wanted something. She spent the first half of lunch with superficial small talk, asking about the business but clearly not listening to my answers. Then, as our entrees arrived, she dropped her bombshell. "So I found the perfect penthouse," she announced, pulling out her phone to show me photos of an obscenely luxurious apartment in the city's most exclusive high-rise. "It's only $1.4 million, which is actually a steal for the location. I need you to buy it for me. Not help with a down payment, not co-sign a loan, buy it outright for her." I nearly choked on my salad. When I recovered, I carefully explained that while I was doing well financially, I didn't have that kind of liquid capital. Most of my money was tied up in the business, and what wasn't was being saved for long-term security. Besides, I said, I had already helped her with numerous loans that were never repaid. Her face hardened in a way I recognized from childhood, the prelude to a tantrum. "You spent hundreds of thousands on Alex's medical bills," she hissed. "You helped him, it's only fair you help me too." I tried to explain the difference between life-saving medical care and a luxury penthouse, but she wasn't interested in logic. When it became clear I wasn't giving in, she abruptly stood up, threw her napkin on the table, and stormed out, leaving me with the check naturally. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later, my mother called demanding an emergency family meeting. When I arrived at her house that evening, Vanessa was sitting smugly on the couch, while Mom paced the living room, practically vibrating with rage. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in manipulation. My mother alternated between guilt-tripping, "After everything we've done for you," gaslighting, "You've always been jealous of your sister," and outright threats. The final ultimatum came as I was reaching for my coat to leave. "You buy your sister that penthouse or you're no longer my daughter," she spat. "She gets everything she wants, you get nothing. That's how it should be. If you can't accept that, then you don't deserve to be part of this family." I stood frozen, the reality of my family dynamic finally crystallizing with perfect clarity. This wasn't about the penthouse. This was about maintaining the hierarchy that had been established since childhood. Vanessa's wants would always supersede my needs, and I was expected to sacrifice willingly on the altar of her contentment. "I need to think," was all I said before walking out. That night, I called Alex and my fiancé Mark for perspective. Both were outraged on my behalf but cautioned me to take time before making any permanent decisions. Mark was particularly concerned about my emotional state. "I've watched you bend over backward for them for years," he said, holding my hand as I cried. "But there's a difference between being supportive and being exploited. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm." I took a week to reflect, during which neither my mother nor Vanessa reached out, their silence a punishment intended to make me capitulate. Instead, it gave me space to think clearly for perhaps the first time in my relationship with them. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Jerry Wilson, our company CFO and my father's oldest friend, asked to meet me privately. His face was grave as he closed my office door. "Your mother came to see me yesterday," he said without preamble. "She wanted me to prepare documents transferring controlling interest in Westfield to Vanessa." My blood ran cold. "That's not possible. Dad left the business to me." Jerry shook his head. "It's complicated. Your father left you operational control, but the ownership structure is more complex. Your mother controls a significant portion of shares as his widow, and she's determined to put Vanessa in charge." I sat in stunned silence as Jerry explained the legal intricacies. My mother couldn't completely remove me, but she could effectively hamstring my authority and create a power-sharing situation where Vanessa, who had never worked a day in the business and had no relevant experience, would have equal say in all major decisions. "Emily," Jerry said gently, "I worked with your father for 30 years. This is not what he wanted, and frankly, it would be disastrous for the company. Vanessa would run it into the ground within a year, and everyone knows it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of my father in his hospital bed kept flashing through my mind, his plea for me to protect the business and its people echoing in my ears. By morning, I had made my decision. If my mother wanted a corporate battle, she'd get one, but I wouldn't be the only casualty. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case and gathering allies. I met with key employees who had witnessed Vanessa's entitlement firsthand during her rare appearances at company functions. I consulted with board members who were concerned about the company's future. Most importantly, I met with my father's personal attorney, who revealed something Jerry hadn't known: Dad had left contingency plans. Anticipating potential conflict, my father had established specific conditions that had to be met before control of the company could be transferred. These included a proven track record in the industry, demonstrated financial responsibility, and approval from a supermajority of the board. Vanessa failed on all counts. When I called an emergency board meeting, my mother and Vanessa arrived expecting a surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing a united front. One by one, board members and longtime employees testified to my leadership capabilities and Vanessa's consistent irresponsibility. I presented documentation of every time Vanessa had interfered with business operations or damaged client relationships. Finally, I revealed my father's contingency provisions. The vote was unanimous in my favor. My mother's face contorted with rage as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. Vanessa screamed accusations and threats, her composure completely shattered. When security was called to escort them out, my mother turned to deliver one final blow. "You think you've won, but you've lost the only people who ever loved you," she snarled. "You're dead to me now." I watched them leave, feeling oddly calm. "No," I said quietly, though they couldn't hear me. "I've just stopped letting the dead weight drown me." I'd naively hoped that would be the end of it, that my mother and Vanessa would lick their wounds and move on. I underestimated their capacity for vindictiveness. The smear campaign began almost immediately. Vanessa took to social media, painting herself as the victim of my corporate greed. She twisted the narrative, claiming I had manipulated our grieving mother and stolen her rightful inheritance. She even implied I had coerced our father on his deathbed, taking advantage of his weakened state to secure the business for myself. My mother worked the phone lines, calling family, friends, distant relatives, even clients and business associates. Her version cast me as an ungrateful daughter who had turned my back on family loyalty for power and money. She conveniently omitted the penthouse demand and her own ultimatum. For weeks, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from confused acquaintances asking for my side of the story. I maintained my dignity, refusing to engage in a public mudslinging match. This restraint only seemed to infuriate Vanessa and my mother further, escalating their attacks. The confrontation reached its peak when they appeared unannounced at the Westfield offices during a meeting with our largest client. Vanessa created a scene in the lobby, loudly accusing me of theft and betrayal. When security tried to intervene, my mother played the devastated parent, crying that she just wanted to speak with her daughter. The client was visibly uncomfortable, and though they didn't withdraw their contract, the incident damaged our professional relationship. That evening, after damage control and apologies to staff who had witnessed the disruption, I sat in my office feeling the full weight of what was happening. The family I had tried so hard to please for 3 decades was now actively trying to destroy me, professionally and personally. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. I called Alex, who had been monitoring the situation from Chicago with growing concern. "It's time for legal measures," he said firmly. "A cease and desist at minimum, maybe a restraining order." I hesitated, still struggling with the finality such actions represented. "They're still our family, Alex." His response cut through my lingering sentimentality. "Family doesn't try to destroy you for refusing to be exploited. They made their choice. Now you need to protect yourself and Dad's legacy." The next day, I had my corporate attorney send formal cease and desist letters to both my mother and Vanessa, warning that any further attempts to interfere with Westfield business would result in legal action. I also instructed our security team not to allow them entry to any company property and changed my phone number. The following weeks were strangely peaceful. With clear boundaries established, I was able to refocus on what mattered: running the business, supporting Alex's writing career, and planning my future with Mark. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the emotional burden of managing my mother's and sister's expectations. I felt lighter, clearer, more myself than I had in years. Then the unexpected financial fallout began to affect them. 6 months after the board meeting showdown, I received a call from an unknown number during a site visit. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia. "Emily, I'm worried about your mother and Vanessa," she said without preamble. "They're in financial trouble, and I think it's worse than they're admitting." After disconnecting from the family money train, my mother and sister had quickly discovered that their lifestyle was unsustainable. My mother had been living primarily on the income from Westfield and my father's life insurance. Vanessa had never held a steady job, bouncing between short-lived positions whenever she needed cash between bailouts from our parents. According to Aunt Patricia, Vanessa had been evicted from her apartment for non-payment and had moved in with my mother. They had begun selling off valuables to maintain appearances. Several credit cards were maxed out. They had even approached Patricia for a loan, which raised red flags since they had always looked down on her more modest lifestyle. I thanked her for the information but made no promises to intervene. That evening, I discussed it with Mark and Alex during our weekly video call. "It was inevitable," Alex said. "They've never had to face consequences before." Mark was more concerned about me. "Are you okay? I know how manipulative they can be. This could be another attempt to pull you back in." I considered the question seriously. Was I okay knowing my mother and sister were struggling? The answer surprised me with its clarity. Yes, I was, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because facing reality was the only way they might ever change. "I think," I said slowly, "this might be the most loving thing I can do for them. They need to learn there are consequences to their actions." But my mother and Vanessa had one more act of desperation to perform. 2 weeks later, as I was leaving a business dinner with clients, they ambushed me in the restaurant parking lot. Both looked disheveled, a shocking change from their usually immaculate appearances. My mother's designer outfit was wrinkled and worn, while Vanessa's hair was unwashed and hastily pulled back. "We need to talk," my mother demanded, stepping into my path. Vanessa stood slightly behind her, alternating between glaring at me and casting anxious glances around the parking lot. You can't just pretend we don't exist, she added, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I remained calm. I have nothing to say to either of you, please step aside. My mother's face twisted with familiar manipulation. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, leaving your family destitute while you live in luxury. You chose this, I replied evenly. You gave me an ultimatum: buy Vanessa a penthouse or be disowned. I simply accepted your terms. That was different, Vanessa cried. You were being selfish. I looked at her incredulously. Selfish for not spending over $1 million on your luxury condo? Do you even hear yourself? My mother attempted a different approach, her voice softening. Darling, we've all said things we regret. We're family. We need to stick together. Family? I repeated, the word hollow. You only remember we're family when you need something from me. When it's my needs, my feelings, my boundaries on the line, suddenly family doesn't matter. I stepped around them, heading for my car. I have to go. You can't just leave us like this, Vanessa shouted, her composure cracking completely. We have nowhere to go. I turned back one last time. That sounds like a problem for the daughter you still have, I said to my mother, the one who gets everything she wants. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, two diminished figures standing under the parking lot lights, the consequences of their actions finally catching up to them. In the year following that parking lot confrontation, I maintained complete no contact. Attempts at communication through intermediaries were politely but firmly rebuffed. I changed all my passwords, upgraded my home security system, and instructed staff to direct any inquiries from them to my attorney. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection and peace. Meanwhile, Westfield Construction thrived under my leadership. We expanded into sustainable building practices, winning several major contracts for eco-friendly commercial developments. Employee satisfaction reached an all-time high after I implemented profit sharing and improved benefits. Dad would have been proud not just of the business success, but of how we treated our people. Alex's novel, loosely based on our family dynamics, was picked up by a major publisher and garnered critical acclaim. The process of writing it had been therapeutic for him, transmuting our shared trauma into art that resonated with others from dysfunctional families. We celebrated with a weekend trip to New York for his first major book signing. Mark and I married in a simple ceremony on the beach, surrounded by genuine friends and chosen family. Alex was my person of honor. Some extended family members attended, having seen through my mother's smear campaign, but most stayed away, uncomfortable with taking sides. Their absence was no longer painful. It merely confirmed I'd made the right choices about who deserved space in my life. Occasionally, news of my mother and Vanessa would reach me through the family grapevine. They had been forced to sell my mother's house and move to a modest apartment. Vanessa had cycled through several jobs, unable to maintain the professional facade necessary for long-term employment. My mother had taken a part-time position at a department store, a humbling experience for someone who had once defined herself by her social status. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but neither did I feel responsible for rescuing them. They were adults facing the natural consequences of their choices. In a strange way, it was the most respectful thing I could do: acknowledge their agency and allow them the dignity of managing their own lives, even if that meant hardship.